here. Good morning. A very special guest. Welcome to Sunrise Extra. Hello, Facebook and everyone else. We started a little bit earlier on Instagram. Our big story this morning, an interview reacquainting a lot of people, if you are new to the Northwest, new to Portland, on the Kyron Horman investigation. He was a 7-year-old boy who went missing from his school in Northwest Portland 9 years ago today. Investigator Kyle Iboshi joining us this morning. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you.
So tell us, you can watch Kyle's story right now on KGW.com?
KGW.com.
Yes.
And then an extended version of the interview with Desiree as
Right,
well.
there's a lot there. So there's
Yeah.
a digital right through the whole story. There's also video of the interview we did with Desiree down in Medford, and then the broadcast story as well. So there's a lot there to take in.
We're talking about this today because it was 9 years ago. 9 years ago that he disappeared. And I remember, well, my kids went to Portland Public Schools, and I remember this day 9 years ago because my phone rang.
Right.
And I was getting a robocall from the district saying that there was something about a missing child.
Right.
I just remember like getting hit with that adrenaline, like, what is that? And I remember I called the station to see if they knew about it, because I thought I had no idea it was going to be that big, but I thought, this is big. Do you know anything?
Yeah.
And it was just happening. But looking back, I mean, so many things have happened and we still don't know where the kid is.
Right. And my wife got the same call. She called me and said, hey, do you know anything about this? It was actually a mistake that it went to all Portland Public
is that right?
School students and parents. It was supposed to only go to Skyline families. But yeah, I mean, 9 years ago today, disappeared from Skyline School in Northwest Portland. There have been tremendous searches for years looking for this little boy. A lot of tips, a lot of clues. And so far, nothing.
But Desiree wrote this new book, and that's what you were telling us about during our Sunrise show.
Right. So she had said something big is coming last year. It was a year ago that she made that statement. And everybody's like, what's going on here? And so for the past 2 years, actually, she's been working with a best-selling author to write this book, to really set the record straight about the disappearance of her son, but also really kind of pin the blame on the person she thinks is responsible, and that's the stepmom, Terry Horman, who even in court papers, they describe as the prime suspect. And there have been a lot of questions and suspicious activities surrounding Terry Horman for years.
Can you go back to, as much as you can, that day he was what, in second grade? Second grade. He had a little science fair. He was doing a report on frogs, I remember.
Right. And it was
what kind of happened that day? I mean,
well, and it was a weird day at school because it was a science fair. And so all the parents were there, all the kids were there, just a lot of chaos in the morning. So it wasn't a normal morning. And a lot of parents tell me that. It was just, there were a lot of people coming and going. And so that made it kind of troubling in that you don't know who was here, who was not there, maybe some grandparents here, maybe neighbors to see these science projects. And he was spotted there at the school, and even Terry Horman took this photo of him that we know now as being that kind of the last known image of Kyron Horman.
And that's what this one
project.
is.
Terry Horman, his stepmom, dropped him off at school that day. Is that
right,
the case?
Right. And then she ran some errands throughout the morning after that. She and her husband, Kane, went to go pick him up at the bus stop, and he never arrived. And that's when it triggered the big search. And from that point, the story continued on.
So Skyline School, if people aren't familiar, it's in Northwest. It's kind of, you know, that area is completely forested.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of territory to cover, and they tried to search as much as they could. And was there no physical evidence that came from any of that?
Right, right. They've never found any clothing, any of his belongings, nothing. It was the largest, one of the largest searches in state history. Over about 10 days. Like, it was intense, because I remember that vividly. We had our helicopter up, and we could see searchers in the water. We could see them in the fields. They were doing these grid searches back and forth. They called in all the parents to do interviews. The FBI came on scene right away. I mean, it was all hands on deck. I had never seen that level of response from law enforcement ever.
And that happened on a Thursday or Friday, I want to say. I remember it was like the talk of the town by Saturday on the weekend. And I'm thinking, as you're covering that story, you probably in your head are thinking, okay, someday next week, we're going to bring an end to this story. Good, bad, or indifferent, there'll be an end. 9 years later, there is no end. You've definitely covered the story more than anyone in our newsroom, probably anyone in the city. And Kyron's mom seems to be really comfortable talking to you. So can you remind us again, why was it that she, when was it that she said, I know who did it? What are the reasons, the biggest reasons she gives for why she thinks for sure the stepmom did it?
She says she knew right away. She says when Terry called her that day and said Kyron is missing, something went off. She said, this is not right. And she actually...
Wasn't there something where she had said she wanted him out of her life or something
right.
like
There
that.
had been some emails exchanged between family members that kind of raised suspicions about her relationship with Kyron. But there were a lot of her whereabouts that particular day. Since then, we kind of had some questions about where she was at certain times. And police even put out this flyer at one point early in the investigation that says, have you seen Terry Horman and have you seen the family's white truck in this area? So, I mean, law enforcement's eyes were on Terry very early on.
So she says that over the years, this has ruined her life. She maintains her innocence. She disappeared down to live with her family in Southern Oregon. She's changed her name. She's remarried. But she has not pushed back. She's kind of disappeared, right? And
yeah, yes and no. I mean, she went on the Dr. Phil show. She also did an interview, I think, with a national publication, I think People magazine, to declare her innocence at one point. So she's spoken out and said, I didn't do this, and has maintained her innocence throughout. I've tried to reach out to her, I don't know how many times, in person, by email, by mail, by phone, I mean, everything. And she's never...
weird stuff, like wasn't there some plot to...
Right, a murder for hire plot involving Cain, allegedly. And that was part of the divorce and restraining order that occurred shortly after Kyron disappeared, is that he said that police had provided him information to suggest she was responsible for Kyron's disappearance. And also, there were claims that she had approached the family landscaper in an effort to have Cain killed. So that's kind of the unusual nature of this whole story, that it just, it's like, what?
And so Kyron's father and his mother, Kyron's father and Terry also had a child.
Right.
And that child was taken away from Terry, right? And
correct.
The custody goes to Cain.
Right.
So she's somewhere else, and she doesn't even have custody of any of her kids because of all of this.
Correct. And as far as we know, there's no visitation either. So she's basically severed ties and moved on.
So I remember when they announced this, and they were all standing in the church, and it was Cain and Terry, and then Desiree and her husband. Your piece really kind of took us back there, and Desiree said she felt then that Terry was lying. And we streamed that live. I mean, it was going out over our air, and they looked like grieving people, but she had doubts even at that moment.
Terry had her arm around Desiree in that video, and Desiree's
seeing
words
it now
were,
is
why isn't God straightening her down right now?
Yes.
Yeah. No, when you look back at that video today, knowing what we know and just kind of the backstory here, you look at it with a different eye.
So tell me what you think is happening now, because you alluded to the fact, or Desiree did, that there were actually some new searches and some places that they haven't looked before. What do we know that's new?
Right. Well, she says it's a very active investigation. In fact, she says it's more active in the past 2 years than it has been in quite some time. She said in the past 9 months there have been searches of new undisclosed locations. She says there's new evidence based on technology, phone and computer evidence, which police are utilizing. So I think behind the scenes things are happening. I mean, we don't hear about it. I mean, unfortunately, every anniversary we hear about it and we say, okay, it's been 7 years, 8 years, now 9 years. But I think behind the scenes there is activity. There are things going on. There are efforts being made to find this little boy and bring some resolution to
10 years ago, were they able to track her cell phone to a certain tower, or was it not very accurate? I mean, within like a 10-mile range or something?
Good question. I mean, the technology has changed significantly in the past 9 years. So back then, there were cell towers, yes, and they could use some of this technology and triangulation, as detectives have talked about, but it's not as sophisticated as it is today. I mean, your phone is amazing today and what it can
What you
capture.
said in something in the package, Desiree alluded to, was that there was some kind of DNA of Kyron's that was found in the back of Terry's truck. That's the first I've heard of that.
It was the first we'd heard about it as well.
Very vague, like what is, and Desiree was kind of letting you in on that.
And honestly, I don't have that much information about that. Just what she said, and it was more so a statement made by Terry that caused Desiree to kind of step back and be like, what are you saying? But law enforcement has never talked about that specifically, and I think big picture too, you kind of step back a little bit and think about when it comes to DNA evidence. I mean, he's a child in that family, and so theoretically there could be some type of DNA in the vehicle, but I don't want to theorize too much and speculate on what the exact meaning behind that, but I thought that was really interesting, and if nothing else, she described how Terry was just kind of flippant about it and trying to explain.
Yeah, I want to just update because people are asking, what are you guys talking about? So if you're just tuning in with us, Kyron Iboshi is joining us now. He had a great interview with Kyron Horman's mom, Desiree Young, who lives down in the Medford area now. Kyron has been missing. Today is the 9th anniversary of when he disappeared from his school, Skyline School up in Northwest Portland. If you're new to Portland, this has been a huge case over the years where he's still missing. No evidence of him found. He disappeared from a science fair at his school. So yeah, a lot of people are chiming in saying, I remember this. Portland Gold says, I remember I saw the state blockage questioning people at Skyline School that day. He was up in that area. I turned around on Skyline and drove back home because the road was blocked. Yeah, pretty crazy. But if you were here 9 years ago, you definitely remember
That's the thing
that
that
weekend.
we all take it for granted because we were all working here. Nina, you may have been in Bend at the time, but obviously from Portland, totally tuned into the story. We just kind of assume that everyone knows about the story. Anyone who's moved in the last 5 or 6 years may not be as familiar. I will say Kyron's parents, mom and dad both, have done a wonderful job in keeping his name relevant, keeping his name out there, keeping his memory alive, and keeping this investigation going, keeping it top of mind for all people.
Because you hear about those cases of those other girls who have escaped somehow, if they were taken, or, I mean, Jamie Kloss, that most recent one, I mean, she was gone for, what, 2 months or something, and escaped. I mean, you never know, and that's kind of the hope that Desiree is holding out, that, he's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
So I feel viscerally about it. I mean, when you hear her talk, I was listening to your piece and I started to tear up because you just go there. You put yourself in her position. The other thing I think of kind of as a news person, Terry has not been charged.
Right.
Is Desiree in any kind of legal jeopardy when she opens up and said, I know you took my kid.
Right.
You took my kid.
Right.
That part of this always, I just wonder
as
about
a news person,
that.
it makes you nervous of like they're not labeled a suspect.
That's what I meant really when I said that she kind of disappeared.
Right.
Because if, I don't know what I would do, but I'm just going to kind of put it out there. I'm thinking if I didn't, I would be going after you. But it seems like everybody's kind of stepped back as far as the accused, and it's very definitive. Desiree says, you did it. I know she did it.
Right.
But like Kyle mentioned, I mean, Terry came out on a couple of big platforms, national show, the Dr. Phil show, People magazine, claimed her innocence. Maybe she's of the opinion of how many times do I have to do that? And put it aside. That's the other thing that is crazy to me. If it wasn't Terry, there has not been one other person in all these years. There wasn't like, or maybe it was this person. No, it's always been that one.
Was there ever, though? Refresh our memory, because there.
I mean, not that I can think of. I mean, again, in court papers, they described her as the prime suspect. A judge did. Desiree filed a civil lawsuit against Terry Horman years ago. So they've done everything they can to try and pressure Terry and put more pressure on Terry and call her out. This may be another example of it in the book, is trying to illustrate why and how she may be responsible.
Kyle, question for you. A lot of people asking on Facebook, like a lot of people, remind them who Dee Dee Spicer is, because she was another name in this case, and that was what, Terry's best friend,
yes,
right?
Very close friend. And there were some questions about her whereabouts at the time Kyron disappeared. And there was some question as to what role, if any, she had played. She was called before a grand jury at one point. This is the Dee Dee Spicer figure. Took the fifth, didn't provide any information. She's now living down in Southern Oregon. And it is one of those stories that there are so many characters or people that have been called in to question. And it's just such an unusual case that, I mean,
that's what makes
you could write a
it
book
so
and indeed
weird.
that's exactly what Desiree is now doing.
That's what makes it so weird, is there are so many people, and usually when there are multiple people involved, or I mean, they're not suspects, but just people affiliated with the case, somebody talks, somebody says something, there's a break after 9 years, there's something that leads to answers. And they're back to kind of square one.
Yeah, it's amazing that no one has come forward and said, oh, I saw Terry at this moment and that day. Like, there's none of that. You'd think there'd be one person who saw something. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, again, it was a unique day at the school. And I think there have been people that have come forward and talked to law enforcement, maybe not publicly, as far as what they saw that day. But again, nothing significant enough that they could say either A, we could charge someone, or B, we could locate
But so they're at school, you have the science fair going on. There must be other little, class time after that. I don't know if you even remember or can recall off the top of your head, was he seen in class later that day, at lunchtime?
Right, and that's always been the big question, exactly. What was the,
or was it just
the
so
last
busy
person
that,
to see him,
like
where,
head counts
and when?
were hard?
And honestly, I believe that law enforcement probably has that information nailed down much better than we do. I mean, we've kind of taken it third hand from various people. But end of the day, they don't know what happened.
I thought it was interesting too because correct me if I'm wrong, but this case was the one that changed district policy about when you notify a parent about a child's absence.
Yeah.
Because it used to be that if your kid was gone, they could skip, depending on what their age was, and you never knew in real time.
Right, or you get a call like end of the day or maybe the next day, as I recall. Now, my phone rings that morning to say, hey, they're not at school.
Yes.
And
which is
happy
great.
about that?
Exactly. There were also some security measures taken as well in Portland Public Schools as a result of this shortly after. And it's changed the way we look at things too, I think. I think all of us, we step back and we're like, wow, this is...
So somebody asking on Instagram real quick, Kyle, have local authorities been using new DNA tests and stuff now? I guess if there's been no evidence, there's really...
Yeah, and we don't know.
They don't tell us.
I exchanged an email with Multnomah County Sheriff's Office yesterday, which is leading this investigation, and they simply replied that the investigation is continuing. And honestly, that's about all that we've gotten from investigators over the years. Yeah. They really have not been willing to share any information, anything specific about the investigation or where things stand.
I thought it was really poignant, sorry, Drew, when I saw your Facebook post and I read what you wrote about all the files on your desk.
Right.
So when I saw that stack of tattered paper, things that you've accumulated, looked into, calls you've made, imagine how much greater the volume is. But can you talk a little bit about what it's been like for you covering this case since the beginning?
And actually, so I've got those files, and there are multiple files stacked about this high on my desk, and I'm going to do a Facebook Live at 7:30 to answer people's questions. But I was thinking about bringing those back and kind of walking people through it, because you look back at the newspaper headlines that I have saved from that day, and you look back at the flyers. So the one thing I remember is, my name is Kyle, his name is Kyron, but I didn't want to be thrown off and I didn't want to forget his name. So I posted that flyer up on the windshield as I was doing these live reports so I could always remember his name, because I'd turn and be like, Kyron. Well, now, I know that name like this. I know every detail about that. I know every person who's been involved in the case like that. But I remember those first few days, like,
because it was
trying
kind
to remember
of an
the
odd
little boy's
name and how to,
just trying to remember the little boy's name, and now 9 years later thinking, God, what an impression that name has left me with, and this little boy that I never met, but I feel like I really do know.
And your kids were young back then. 9 years ago. So it's just everyone's sadly grown up. And
as a reporter, it's one of those stories where you clearly separate yourself from the subjects, but you also feel what they're feeling sometimes, or I don't know if you feel it necessarily, but I think you see it in their eyes, and you hear their voices, and you think, wow.
You're human.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So you did really, in my mind at least, become identified with this story here in the walls of KGW. I feel like when I think of that story, you were always on it. Yeah. Can you walk us through that? Was that luck of the draw at the beginning, or did you say, no, I was out there, I want to continue to follow this?
Honestly, I don't remember that as far as I think it was kind of all hands on deck, as I recall, in those first few days. I do remember being out in front of the school, because they kept us across the street at this church parking lot, a historic church, and we watched as these parents were being called in, because they called all the parents in, and it was like Portland police detectives, it was the FBI, and they questioned every one of them. What do you remember? What did you see? And I was just astounded by that. And then they went back at the same time and stopped cars as they were coming through there, thinking somebody during their morning commute that would typically drive through that area, asking them. And I remember just, wow, how extensive this investigation is and how specific they are. And I had never seen anything quite like that. Now, we had some missing children cases just prior to that. There was one in Oregon City that I had covered extensively, and that kind of gave me some feel for what it was like covering one of these cases, but this was, and I wonder if, because of those other cases, that's why they said, you know what, we're all in on this.
Can you tell us real quick how Kane is doing, Kyron's father?
Yeah, I check in with him from time to time, and he's doing okay. He works out there at Intel, and as far as I know, still lives in the same house, but he's got a young daughter that he cares for, and seems to be doing okay considering the circumstances. He does a good job too of getting the name out as well, and there's like a
He
car
does that
show,
car show
right,
every year,
where he works really hard to keep Kyron's name and face out there. And that's really the important thing. I mean, while there have been a lot of bizarre twists and turns to this story, I mean, end of the day, it's all about this little boy and finding this little boy, and I hope people recognize that and remember that's the focus here is Kyron Horman and trying to find this little boy. And if people have information, that's your thing, I mean, call the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, because every little tidbit helps. I mean, maybe, who knows, maybe somebody's been sitting on information for 9 years and been like, well, I didn't really think anything of it, but that's what typically it takes, is that one break in a case.
Yes.
Right.
Last week, Desiree told us there would be a big announcement this week. So that big announcement you told us about this morning on the Sunrise Show was the new book.
Right.
And it's still going to be a while before we see that book.
Yep.
But that was another part of the story that really pulled at your heartstrings. It's called Love You Forever. And if you have a child, you've probably read the story, Love You Forever, Love You For Always, which apparently was Kyron's favorite story.
Yeah.
So she named the book after that book that he loved. And again, did she give you an idea on when we might be able to see this book?
By the end of the year.
Okay.
Yeah. They're in their final read-through. She's been working with this author for a long time and feels really good about it. And so hopefully by the end of the year, we'll actually get a chance to read it.
But this morning at 9 a.m., she's going to be talking more about this.
Right, and sharing more details about the book and speaking with everybody about it.
Yeah, and in 10 minutes, you're going to be doing another one of these
Yes.
on Facebook Live.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep talking with Kyle, you can talk to him directly, ask him any questions. Just go to KGW's right here on KGW's Facebook page. I forgot, that's where we are.
Yes.
Hi, Instagram, sorry. Log on to Facebook, ask Kyle some questions. A lot of people, chiming in with their theories
Right.
and where they were on that day, because a lot of us remember that. So Kyle's going to be talking a lot about this story live here on Facebook. You can watch his story on kgw.com. And the book will be out later on in the year. So thank you guys so much for watching Sunrise Extra. Thanks for tuning in and chatting live with us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow.